Democracy thrives on transparency. That's why we document Irish political voices as they are, complete, unedited, and accessible to all. Subscribe to join us in strengthening public discourse.
Proved by the figures that are published today, over years and years, whereby the government has not been providing assessment of needs for children within the 6-month time frame set out by the legislation. In fact, there's over 10,000 children, well over 10,000 children now waiting for assessments of needs beyond the time frame. And Karadarmadi is to be applauded for the stance that she is taking, but she absolutely should not have to take this stance. Today there will be a number of us are going out to Cara later on today, and then her voice will feature in the debate today. There's a joint motion from all of the opposition demanding action on assessment of needs, and then there's statements on this crisis. Obviously the assessment of needs is only the first step, and that's what parents will tell us. Even after you get the assessment of needs, okay, then you're on another long waiting list that seems to go on forever. Then there is the separate but related issue of people trying to find appropriate school places. So the very short-term solution is clear, is to provide the money to go and buy the assessment of needs, but the medium-term solution is to invest in building up capacity, invest in building up the necessary therapists within our CDN-Ts. And it's a very good thing that the opposition is working together on this issue. Second point I want to make is about, people may have seen the story about Klave and Samantha Ryan. This is a case that I raised at a press conference across the road, launching a bill. I raised it at the Dáil a number of times. The incredible situation of a family in Kilnamana who are doing the right thing, who got external wall insulation, and then were faced with the prospect of a fine or even imprisonment for not having planning permission for this external wall insulation. Thankfully their appeal has been granted by the council, so they're going to be able to keep their external wall insulation. The threat of sanction has been dropped. That is, a victory for basic common sense and environmental action. But unfortunately, others could still face the same situation. So I'm going to be introducing in the Dáil in first stage this week our bill to exempt external wall insulation from the need for planning permission. We need to be encouraging people to take this measure to reduce carbon emissions and to bring their bills down, not creating obstacles for people. And the final thing is to mark, it's obviously 10 years since the very, very important victory of marriage equality. That was a victory won from below by LGBTQ campaigners and allies coming out to support, pressuring, forcing a referendum, and then winning the referendum by a very, very significant margin. We've still a long way to go in many respects, and in some respects it's important to note that there are forces in society that are trying to drag us backwards. I was struck by the statement by Panty Bliss over the weekend saying that 10 years ago I wouldn't be called a paedophile in the streets, and yet now that's a thing that is happening. We saw last night a Labour Party event had to be cancelled because of a threat of a far-right protest. Obviously that's something that has affected us repeatedly, been repeatedly targeted by the far-right. And so just say to people, there are those that want to drag us backwards. Backwards in terms of women's oppression, backward in terms of homophobia, spreading lies, spreading fear of gay people, trying to equate being gay with being a paedophile or whatever, all these ideas that are associated with the far right. And it's vital, therefore, that we take a stand in defence of LGBTQ rights and against those who would drag us backwards.
So the other very pressing issue, of course, is what's continuing to happen in Palestine, and hundreds of people have been killed by the Israeli military in the last couple of days. There's a massive escalation of the genocide on Gaza, and since we last spoke, the Taoiseach has published a statement that he's made with other states in the EU, like-minded states, and they've asked, all of the parties to meaningfully engage in the negotiations. But a strongly worded letter is not enough. We need real action. There was a huge march in Dublin on Saturday. About 500,000 people marched in London, apparently, and all around the world the opposition to the military assault on Palestine is continuing like unabated. Unfortunately, the leaders, the people in power in the world, are not acting. So specifically, we're going to be asking Micheál Martin, who boasts when we raise this that we're doing more than anyone else is doing, they're not actually doing things. There's 3 things specifically. So the Occupied Territories Bill is a very obvious one. But also, Shannon Airport and our airspace should not be used by US military and other military powers that are assisting the genocide and funding it. That's a very, very simple thing that the Irish government has the power to do. And thirdly, of course, the Israeli bonds that are being processed by the central bank should not be processed on behalf of the EU. And until that's done, working with like-minded people and having this symbolic support for Palestine actually means nothing. People are being starved. We really need urgent action. The second issue, just to pick up on what Paul said, is obviously disability in general and the way in particular disabled children are treated in this state. The fact that we have to have 2 sessions in the Dáil today on the assessment of needs. 15,000 children are on the waiting lists, and we know that people can be waiting years. In my own area, we have 2 CDNTs in Dublin 15, and one of them has a waiting list of up to 7.5 years. 7.5 years. You go from childhood to teenage years in that time potentially. Last night I held a meeting in my own area on this. There are still many people who don't have school places. That has continued to happen, and there are 12 students who should have had places in a special school called Danu in Dublin 15, and they still don't have those places because the modular building hasn't arrived. So the government is boasting again about how much it cares, how much more it's put in, but the denial of rights to education and to therapy and care is still being denied to children in this state, and it's absolutely scandalous that this state is continuing to do that. So just want to mention 2 bills that I'm progressing myself. So next week I'll be moving the first stage of a ban on fox hunting, and a lot of animal rights groups are very excited about this because this cruelty shouldn't be continuing. And my bill on counselling notes to be outlawed in trials has been selected in the lottery on the 12th of June. So there are 2 bills that we're going to be pushing for as well.
Just in terms of the assessment of need, would you support government change of legislation in relation to this, or would you have any concerns that might sort of dilute the number of hours of assessment a child is being given?
Legislation in terms
the government is probably going to bring legislation forward on assessment of need to deal with the High Court ruling about the number of hours.
Yeah, I think it's very worrying what the government is talking about, really. You have a situation where the government is in breach of the law, and there's 2 ways of squaring the circle of stopping being in breach of the law. You can actually provide the resources to give the assessment needs in time within the legal framework, or you can change the law to mean that they're not breaking the law anymore. And I think what the government is talking about is effectively removing the legal obligation on them to provide the assessment of needs. So it's the government stepping away from a promise that they previously made, from legislation, from law that was previously created, in order to lessen the responsibility of the state to provide assessment of needs. So the answer is the opposite. You know what I mean? The government is squaring the circle by changing the law to legitimise these long waiting lists for children, but instead you need to put the resources in to get rid of the long waiting lists.
And at the root of the problem is the fact that they can't recruit and retain staff. A lot of the OTs, physios, speech and language therapists are moving into the private sector and are actually doing the assessments for parents for money. But we need to be able to keep people in the public system, and that requires obviously action on the housing situation, rewarding people for their work, paying them properly. So that is a real problem, is the retention. 1 in 3 of all the positions across the CDNT system are unfilled.
Do you approve of the private system being used to reduce the waiting list?
Well, if you mean that the government could take an initiative and try to recruit people to clear the waiting list, I would obviously support that. Yeah, because we have to do something, and if they try to do that, at least, even to bring people from the north, could some of them be done online? They're sort of conversations that I would have had with parents locally, And yeah, like they got rid of the passports, backlog. They got rid of other backlogs by taking initiatives. That's needed, yeah.
From the counselling notes, the government are progressing their own legislation on to tighten it up instead of an outright ban. I know you're pushing for an outright ban. Have you had any engagement with them on why an outright ban is needed?
Yeah, so I will obviously talk to the Minister and see what he's proposing, but it seems like what he's proposing is that the right would still exist to access some of these counselling notes, but it would have to go through a judge, and there might be criteria applied. And he's getting rid of the waiver, he has said. So I'll wait to see, but from talking to survivors, the actual fear that this will actually be used is also very, very traumatising. So you will decide, I won't go in case this person is successful in their appeal to the judge to access the notes. I think we need a situation like in the US where counselling between a client and a therapist is privileged. I think it was ironic, and I said this in the Dáil last week, that Jacqueline Connolly, the sister of Clodagh Haw, spoke about a priest who was able to plead confessional privilege and not disclose vital information about heinous crimes against a woman and children, and that was allowed to happen. But yet, a victim of a crime can have their notes seized. Why do we have that? Why do we allow that?
Can I ask you on a separate matter? Sorry, the Eurovision. Is it time Ireland just decides to boycott next year's competition now?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an incredible situation, isn't it? When this is about normalisation of a genocidal state. That's what it's about. That's the purpose of it. Let's not pretend that it has nothing to do with politics from the point of view of Israel. It has everything to do with politics. And by Ireland participating, we are legitimising this normalisation effort. We think there needs to be full boycott of Israel, and that would include, the best case scenario is that Israel is kicked out of the competition. That's what should happen. That's what happened in terms of Russia. That's clearly what should happen. But if they won't be, well then the idea that we should be continuing to participate in this, it doesn't make any sense.
And should RTE do an audit of the public voting in this year's competition?
Yes, this is only in my kind of peripheral vision, to be honest. I didn't watch it. I probably wouldn't watch it anyway, but I would have boycotted it. And I'm kind of aware that there's suspiciously high votes for Israel in a range of countries. So yes, I'm not across the detail of it at all, but I think the idea that there's certainly question marks being asked about it, that there should be an audit of the public vote, yeah.
Thank you for watching. If you want to stay connected with the most important voices in Irish politics, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Here you get unfiltered access to political debates, speeches, and interviews, straight from the source, every single day. Be informed, be engaged, right here with us.